The bustling Oyingbo Market in Lagos never slept. From dawn to dusk it pulsed with life, filled with the cacophony of traders haggling, children weaving through crowds, and the enticing aroma of various foods wafting through the humid air. Among the countless food vendors who lined the market's periphery was a woman known simply as Abisola, whose story would become a cautionary tale whispered in market corners for years to come. Abisola had arrived at Oyingbo Market 6 months ago, full of dreams and ambition. She had invested her life savings into a modest food stall, hoping to make a name for herself among the market's numerous food vendors. Her stall sat at the corner of a busy intersection, where hundreds of traders and customers passed daily. It should have been the perfect location for a thriving business, but Abisola's pot remained stubbornly full at the end of each day. The problem wasn't her location, it was her cooking. Abisola had never properly learned the art of seasoning Nigerian dishes. Her jollof rice often emerged from the pot either burnt or mushy, her egusi soup was watery and bland, and her stews were an assault on the taste buds with their excessive pepper and palm oil. The few customers who did try her food never returned, their faces contorted in barely concealed disgust as they forced themselves to finish their meals. Just 3 stalls away stood Mama Chidi's Food Heaven, a humble establishment that had been feeding the market's hungry masses for over 15 years. Mama Chidi, a plump, cheerful woman in her 50s, had mastered the art of cooking through years of dedication and passion. Her jollof rice was legendary, with perfectly balanced spices that made each grain sing with flavor. Her soups were rich and hearty, filled with fresh meat and fish that melted in one's mouth. Even her simple beans and plantain carried a distinctive taste that kept customers coming back day after day. Every morning, Abisola would watch in growing bitterness as crowds gathered around Mama Chidi's stall, forming long queues that sometimes stretched around the corner. Market women would send their apprentices to reserve spots in line, and office workers would call ahead to ensure their portions were served. By 2 p.m., Mama Chidi's pots would be empty, while Abisola's remained full, the food growing cold and unappetizing. "This one na which food?" a customer once muttered after tasting Abisola's bitter leaf soup. "How person go put this kind pepper for soup? It be like sena punishment." Such comments cut deep into Abisola's pride. She had invested everything into this business, her savings, her time, her dreams, yet day after day, she watched her investments literally go to waste as unsold food was thrown away. The sight of Mama Chidi's success became a thorn in her flesh, a constant reminder of her own failure. One particularly difficult evening, as Abisola disposed of another day's worth of unsold food, she overheard 2 market women discussing a powerful native doctor who lived in Ikorodu. They spoke in hushed tones about his ability to solve any problem, no matter how impossible it seemed. "That man's juju no be here oh," one woman whispered, "and a real power him get." The seeds of desperation had already taken root in Abisola's heart, and these words provided fertile soil for them to grow. That night, instead of returning to her small apartment in Yaba, she boarded a Danfo bus heading to Ikorodu. The journey was long and uncomfortable, but the fire of jealousy burning in her heart made her barely notice the discomfort. The native daughter's compound sat at the edge of a thick forest, surrounded by tall trees whose branches seemed to whisper ancient secrets. The compound's walls were adorned with various charms and totems, and the air was thick with the smell of burning herbs and incense. Abisola's heart pounded as she approached the compound's entrance, where a young boy sat on a wooden stool. "I want to see Baba," she said, her voice trembling slightly. The boy didn't speak but led her through a maze of corridors until they reached a dimly lit room. There, seated on a mat surrounded by cowrie shells, bones, and various fetish objects, was an elderly man with penetrating eyes that seemed to look straight through her. "Abisola," he said before she could introduce herself, "I have been expecting you." The fact that he knew her name sent chills down her spine, but desperation had made her bold. She explained her situation, the failing business, the superior competition, the daily humiliation of watching customers pass by her stall. The native doctor listened in silence, occasionally throwing cowrie shells on the mat and studying their patterns. When she finished speaking, he reached for a small calabash and began mixing various powders and liquids. "What you seek is possible," he said finally, "but it comes with a price. The charm I will prepare will make your food irresistible to anyone who tastes it. They will crave it like a drunk craves palm wine, but there are conditions." Abisola leaned forward eagerly. "Anything, Baba, I will do anything." First, you must never test your own food once the charm is added. Not even a single grain of rice must touch your tongue. Second, you must bring me a live chicken every new moon for the next 7 moons. Finally, you must never reveal this secret to anyone, or the consequences will be severe. Without hesitation, Abisola agreed to all conditions. The native doctor handed her a small black powder in a leather pouch, instructing her to add 3 pinches to each pot while cooking. The next day, Abisola arrived at her stall earlier than usual. Her hands trembled slightly as she added the black powder to her pots while preparing the day's meals. The powder disappeared instantly, leaving no trace in the food. At first, nothing seemed different. The morning crowd still gathered around Mama Chidi's stall, ignoring Abisola's as usual. But then something strange happened. A trader walking past her stall suddenly stopped, his nostrils flaring as he inhaled deeply. "Ah, what is this smell?" he exclaimed, approaching her stall. "I must taste this food." Before long, others began to notice too. People who had never given her stall a second glance now stood transfixed, drawn by an inexplicable urge to taste her food. By noon, a crowd had gathered around her stall, pushing and shoving to be served. "This food sweet past anything I don't chop for my life," one customer declared, licking his fingers clean. "Auntie, I beg pack extra for my house people," another begged. The transformation was immediate and dramatic. Within days, Abisola's stall became the most popular in the market. Customers fought over her food, sometimes nearly coming to blows when she ran out of a particular dish. Even those who had previously complained about her cooking now sang her praises, claiming they had never tasted anything better. Meanwhile, Mama Chidi's business began to decline. Her once loyal customers now walked past her stall without a second glance, drawn instead to Abisola's by an force they couldn't explain. Day after day, Mama Chidi watched in confusion as her pots remained full while Abisola's emptied within hours. "I don't understand," Mama Chidi would say to herself. "Nothing has changed in my cooking, yet my customers are gone." The other market women whispered among themselves, some suggesting that Mama Chidi had lost her cooking skills, others hinting at darker forces at work. But Mama Chidi, a devout Christian, turned to prayer rather than speculation. Every morning before opening her stall, she would spend an hour in prayer, asking God for guidance and protection. Abisola's success grew exponentially. She bought new pots, hired helpers, and even opened a second stall. Money flowed in abundantly, and she moved from her small apartment to a fancy duplex in Lekki. Her transformation from struggling vendor to successful businesswoman became the talk of the market. But success came with its own challenges. The charm's power seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. Customers became increasingly aggressive in their pursuit of her food, sometimes causing chaos in the market. Some claimed they couldn't go a day without eating from her stall, exhibiting behavior that resembled addiction more than mere preference. The hardest part for Abisola was being unable to test her own food. She had to rely on others to check if the seasoning was right, and the sight and smell of her increasingly popular dishes became a constant temptation. Sometimes, while cooking, she would unconsciously bring a spoon to her lips only to catch herself at the last moment, remembering the native doctor's warning. As her 7th monthly payment to the native doctor approached, events took an unexpected turn. It was a particularly busy day, and the crowd at her stall was larger and more aggressive than usual. In the chaos of serving customers, Abisola began to feel dizzy. The heat from the cooking fires, combined with the press of bodies around her stall, made her feel faint. She tried to step away from the stall, but her legs gave way and she collapsed. The crowd, instead of dispersing, grew more frenzied, concerned that their source of addictive food might be unavailable. A young man who ran a nearby chemist shop rushed to help. He checked her vital signs and declared that she needed immediate medical attention. "She needs to eat something before I can give her any medication," he insisted, reaching for a plate of her own food. Even in her semi-conscious state, Abisola tried to resist. "No, not my food," she mumbled weakly, but her protests were ignored as concerned customers helped the chemist feed her a spoonful of her own jollof rice. The effect was instantaneous and horrifying. As soon as the food touched her tongue, Abisola's body began to convulse violently. Her eyes rolled back in her head, and she began to speak in a voice that wasn't her own, confessing everything: the visit to the native doctor, the charm in the food, her jealousy of Mama Chidi. The crowd watched in horror as Abisola's confession turned into unintelligible screams. She began tearing at her clothes, rolling in the dirt, and babbling incoherently. The market dissolved into chaos as people realized they had been eating charmed food for months. Some wanted to attack her, but others held them back. The police were called, and Abisola was arrested. Still in her manic state, the story spread quickly through Lagos, making headlines in local newspapers. Market food vendor uses juju to charm customers. In the aftermath of the scandal, many of Abisola's former customers fell ill, experiencing withdrawal symptoms that lasted for days. The native daughter's compound in Ikorodu was found abandoned, with no trace of the man who had sold Abisola the charm. Mama Chidi, instead of celebrating her rival's downfall, led the market's women in prayers for those affected by the charmed food. Her business gradually recovered as customers returned, now appreciating the honest, charm-free taste of her cooking more than ever. Abisola was eventually sentenced to prison for endangering public health and using supernatural means to conduct business fraudulently, but the real punishment was her mental state. The charm had broken her mind, leaving her a shadow of her former self, muttering constantly about food she could never taste. The story of Abisola became a cautionary tale in Lagos market, taught to young traders and aspiring food vendors. It served as a reminder that success earned through dubious means often comes with a terrible price, and that patience, hard work, and integrity are the true ingredients for lasting achievement. Years later, whenever new food vendors would set up shop in Oyingbo Market, the older traders would gather them around and tell them the story of Abisola and her charmed food. They would point to the now empty corner where her stall once stood, and warn them about the dangers of envy and the pursuit of quick success. Mama Chidi continued to serve her honest, delicious food until she retired, passing her recipes and wisdom to her daughter. Her legacy lived on not just in the delicious meals she prepared, but in the example she set, that true success comes from dedication, skill, and most importantly, doing things the right way. The market still buzzes with life today, filled with the sounds and smells of honest commerce, but in its corners and alleyways, people still whisper about the time when charmed food cast its spell over Oyingbo Market, and about the terrible price one woman paid for her greed.